Federal judge has struck down Chicago's ban on gun sales, calling it unconstitutional. U.S. District Judge Edmund Chang said the ban didn't square with statistics that show that bad guys rarely buy weapons from licensed dealers, which is true. Thugs are notoriously nonchalant about gun bans. You might as well ask them to wear belts. So who does this decision affect? To me, it's a big win for minorities, for gays, and for women. Minorities who run businesses in urban crime zones can now protect themselves. This is key since surveys of felons show that the biggest factor in choosing a victim is whether they're armed or not. A free TV isn't worth a new orifice. As for gays, there's no better way to reduce gay bashing than being strapped. Talk about real equality. Finally, for women who on average have less muscle mass than men, a snub nose on your hip is a great equalizer, far better than a gym membership. Who needs a stair climber when you got a Smith & Wesson? Sure, go ahead, work on your glutes, but also carry a Glock. So as new research shows that more legal guns means less crime, this ruling is a win, not just for all those gun nuts the media mocks, but for everyone else who deserves a fighting chance against fiends. And it underlines one great truth, that in a world where evil preys on the most vulnerable, keeping the peace means keeping a peace.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Yes, a little play on words. Haven't done that before. Andrea, is this because most of the facts, the judge is basically saying the facts that gun control advocates use aren't bearing out anything real, that when more legalized guns doesn't mean more gun murder?
I think that this judge is specifically looking at precedent from the Supreme Court. If you look at the Heller case, it says that you can't have a law, I should say, that stops you from having a gun in your own home. So I think that this judge, even though he was appointed by President Obama, he's on solid judicial ground. I think we're just so used to liberal activist judges ruling different ways. We're shocked when one actually follows the letter of the law and sound precedent directly from the Supreme Court. But you made the best point in your monologue, Greg. Look at laws like stop and frisk, stand your ground. They disproportionately benefit African Americans, women. They should have guns. We should be allowed to defend ourselves. In Chicago, it's just a case study. You don't need any other facts besides strictest gun laws, highest crime rate, who's most affected.
Bob, you're grinning.
I'm grinning because I wanted to see if you could repeat again what the thing about the gays, why it's helpful to gays, but that's okay. First of all, it is not the murder capital of the world. Chicago has had a plummeting murder rate in the last 12 months.
That is true.
And it is true. Now, you can argue that there's a new police chief and all the rest of it, but the fact is it's gone way down. And all
because it was so high.
They didn't have anywhere else to go.
I'm not going to argue with you guys about this because I know I'm outnumbered 4 to 1. I'll just say this. Last year, there were about 560 children were killed by accidents with guns in a home. That's, to me, all the handguns. If I were ruling the world and ruling this country, there'd be no handguns. You could have long rifles, that's fine. But the idea that somehow this thing gets people to listen, too many children are dying as a result of these things, and I just think it's a mistake. If the NRA wants to do something, another kid got killed this month. Why don't you go to their funeral this week? How about that? Good idea.
That's a really emotional response. Eric, we're trying to deal with stats.
Yeah, let's stay with stats. I have a hunch there are 100 or 200 things that killed more kids than guns last year. Choking on a hot dog probably is one of them. You don't want to ban hot dogs, do you? I assume
I don't think it is.
Anyway, that's an old debate.
A whole different situation.
Here's what the gun debate is kind of like the climate change, global warming debate in reverse. In global warming, the liberals say, no, it's really bad. You have to trust us. We don't really have the stats to back it up. You just have to trust us. Gun debate, we have the stats, but we don't want you to trust the stats. But in both cases, we have to trust the liberals that they know what's best for the people.
The stats that come out are stats by all the right-wing gun nuts. That's where the stats come. Like that Florida thing that said too many people.
Kind of like the BS stats that the IPCC put out for the global warming debate, right?
You're telling me that you're going to fall back on that Florida study, right? That college.
You always use the Florida study, but that's not the only study, Bob. There's more and more research that are showing that more legal gun ownership does not translate into more murders.
Look at the little bug on the bottom. It also says National Rifle Association.
Yes, it wasn't there in this study that found that most restricted states had 10% lower gun murder rates. I want to just go, Dana, this is a quote from the Detroit police chief, James Craig. He said, basically said more citizens were armed, criminals would think twice about attacking them. It's a pretty strong, and that's from the Detroit police chief.
So somebody in the know, someone with experience, and somebody who wants people to be able to help them help themselves. The one thing that none of these studies do, and none of this discussion has talked about, is what people really react to is not just necessarily handgun violence, it's the mass murders that happen like at Sandy Hook. And that is still a mental health issue. It's not necessarily a gun rights issue, a gun control issue. That is something that I think the administration's given it a shot, but that is the toughest nut to crack.
Yes, but it's also the smallest. There is a belief that these mass crimes, what do we call shooting sprees, are on the increase, and they're not.
Well,
true.
let me just ask you, just as we close out here, for all you gun supporters, if this child who was killed 2 weeks ago, his father was indicted because he left his gun out. Can you agree that anybody who leaves their gun unlocked in a house ought to be indicted if somebody gets killed?
I think that's a problem. Yes.
Do you think it should be
Do
indicted?
you think it's the biggest problem when relating to gun control?
I think it's one of the biggest ones.
More kids die from medical malpractice, swimming pools, the list goes on and on. It's a fundamental right. It's in the Bill of Rights. It's in the Constitution.
What the Bill of Rights says,
the
a
liberals love
well-regulated
to
militia.
If you start to interpret the Second Amendment and say, it really doesn't count this way, are we going to apply that same statute to the Fourth or then the First and to just interpret however we want to
Look, I
interpret it?
concede that the Second Amendment does say a well-regulated militia and the people have the right to...
But you forgot the other part.
No,
right to keep and
that's
bear
what I
arms.
said. Listen, I accept this. That doesn't mean I have to like it. Right?
Yeah.
I just think they're dangerous things, that we've become a gun society, and most legitimate societies around the world who don't allow guns, kids don't get killed.
All right. I think we can all agree that we don't like it when kids get killed, Bob. But the other point is, the safest people are the people with the guns.
And there's no indication that it's any safer in Great Britain. I don't think that the stats.
How many kids in Great Britain you think were killed with guns?
Handguns are banned in Great Britain.
That's right.
And I think the death rate by gun isn't any lower than it is here.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
All right, we got to roll. We can do that tomorrow.
Check it.
Ahead,